Okay, so those of you who are joining us right now, inshallah, we will be starting in the next 2 to 3 minutes. So for those of you who are taking down notes, you can use this time to get your pen and papers ready to go. Some of you who are just thirsty, you can grab a glass of water in this time, make it useful. Okay. Okay. Could you share the screen again once more, Sada? So it's those who are waiting, they can see that screen. And your mic is on mute as well, just to let you know.
Yep, sorry.
Exactly. That's fine.
Is it back on, yeah?
Yep, it's back on. So those of you who are joining us on YouTube and Zoom, inshallah, we will be starting at 7:05 sharp, hopefully to finish by just before 8. And inshallah, we're going to be doing our 4th session of Tafsir with Ustadha Nadda today, which is great. Wa alaikum salam, the philosopher MMA on YouTube. Jazakallah for joining us. You had a question. So the philosopher MMA, I remember from our philosophy lesson, you had a question regarding some video, whether you should watch videos with paranormal activity. So I think when we want to learn about the physical, metaphysical worlds, I don't always think YouTube should be the first place that we go to. It should always be embedded in traditional learning from teachers who you trust, people who you know, rather than just limiting our knowledge to YouTube and social media. That's not, I think, I mean, you can always gain knowledge from there, but again, you need to know the sources, where it's coming from. So that's my quick answer to that, but we can talk about that some other point, inshallah. Okay, we're just going to wait another couple of minutes and then we will, inshallah, start. In the meantime, those who have joined us already, if you have any question regarding tafsir, regarding previous lessons, please do let us know. Put them in the chat, either on YouTube or Zoom, and we will, inshallah, ask you for that. We will try and respond. Those of you who are here with us now, inshallah, we're just going to give a final minute or two to to our students to join us in this time, and then we will, inshallah, begin our tafsir. Okay, so looking at some questions, the philosopher MMA has mentioned, would you recommend Muslims to read Tafsir Ibn Kathir? Yeah, I think it's a pretty much good tafsir, definitely. We're all well aware of Ibn Kathir. Just to let you know about the various tafsir out there, it doesn't mean one is better than the other, but rather every tafsir has its own kind, you can say, flavor. So it's like, walking into a shop, you can say, you want to buy a drink and you have like 100 different types, different companies, different flavors. It's a bit like that. With tafsir, you've got to understand you've got to understand the flavor that it comes with, and by that I mean it's more a hadith based tafsir, which is good, I think, for the general public. But again, it depends on how you're approaching the Quran, what you want to take from it. So in that sense, yes, definitely would recommend Tafsir Ibn Kathir if you want a kind of hadith based tafsir. So yes, Ustadha Nadda, you can add to that as well if you like before we start.
No, that's fine, Ustad. Yeah, I think Ibn Kathir would be a good start, especially because it's available in English as well, so it's more accessible by other people. So yeah, definitely.
Yep, and yeah, you can find Ibn Kathir online for free if you need. But there's always this discussion whether one would be better reading a ebook or the actual book. And I think most of the people I've met, they prefer the actual traditional book. But there are others who prefer ebooks as well, where they can take it on the underground, on the train, or whichever country you're from, however you journey, you can do that. And nowadays, you also have audio books. I doubt that Ibn Kathir is down as an audiobook, but that is a good idea, seeing that many of us travel by car or train or bike even. You can have your earphones on and listening to the explanation of the words of Allah. What can be better than that?
I can see that Juwaria has joined us. Assalamu alaikum to Juwaria. Do we have anyone else, Ustad, from the younger students?
Yes, we do. Joining us today is Juwaria. We have Abu Bakr and Suleiman. We have Haris. We have Zahra, who's been with us most of the sessions, also Haris, and Hussein Tahir, who's also been with us for many of our sessions. So well done, everyone
That's
who
great.
is joining us. I think because we've given extra time, let's make a start, inshallah. Those who could not join us, hopefully you'll be watching this in the recorded form, and you
Yeah.
can forward all of this waiting period that we just had right now.
Mhm.
So, Sada, you're more than welcome to start whenever you are ready.
All right, that's fine. Also, to the younger audience, I'm going to be asking you some questions. So just put them in the comments box when you have time. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Today we're going to be carrying on with the same theme of isolation and our fourth session, inshallah, today. Um, okay, so just to recap of what we did last week. So we talked about Surah Al-Anbiya, and we looked at a few verses on that. But the main kind of lesson we took away was when Yunus alayhi salam, was in the stomach of the whale, and how he got there, the journey, of him leaving behind his people, what kind of circumstances he was in, that he was ended up in the whale. We also spoke about the dua, which was the main kind of a lesson away, that he was by himself in the stomach of the whale, and he said the dua. He called out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which was La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minal zalimin. So he recited that, and just to see the simplicity of these words as well. Sometimes, because we know whatever is recorded in the Qur'an is so important, hence why Allah has revealed it for us, the last nation, to the last Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the importance of everything in that Qur'an has enormous amount of importance, and it has so much meaning to everything which is mentioned in the Quran. And sometimes we think we have to go through a lot of hardship. We have to use really big words when we speak to Allah. If you just look at the simplicity of this dua, of just praising Allah, telling Allah, because he loves to be associated, not be associated with anything else. The fact that he's just calling out to Allah alone and praising him and just admitting his mistake was enough. And Allah loved this dua so much that he recorded it for many nations afterwards to come and to read the story, and the fact that Allah took him out of that hardship as well. So sometimes we don't have to use really big words. Even it all depends on the sincerity of how you call out to Allah, which is the main aspect that we want to focus as well. Anyone else remembers what we covered, some of the lessons? Does anyone remember what kind of lessons we took away from this? Ustad Hamid, if you can just have a quick look in the comments box. So what were the few of the lessons that we
So
learned?
Zahra is saying that lessons from Yunus alayhi salam are patience and tolerance, responsibility.
Yes. Yes, excellent. So patience, tolerance, taking responsibility, and there was one more.
And she's mentioned also seeking repentance.
Excellent. Yeah, well done. So these were the 4 lessons that we took away from the surah. Obviously, these are not the only ones. There's so many lessons, and each person, whenever they read the surah, every time they'll come up with different lessons, different reflections that you can take away. But those were the ones that we looked into last week. So well done to Zahra. So following on with the topic that we're going to be focusing on today is on Yusuf alayhi salam. And he had an experience in the well as well as an experience in prison, which both reflects, taken away from the rest of the world, not a good kind of a circumstance that you want to be in. So we're going to be focusing on that. We're not going to be focusing on too much on when he was thrown in the well, but we're going to be focusing on the latter part when he was in the prison and what happened and how did he deal with that. And hopefully we can take some lessons away from that. So just before we actually start looking at the particular verses, I wanted to focus on the surah itself, and the surah Yusuf itself. So Surah Yusuf is a Makkan surah, and Yusuf alayhi salam is also referred as to Joseph. The surah is not that big in terms of its verses. Prophet Yusuf is being mentioned in Surah Al-An'am and in Surah Ghafir, but the main story which is narrated is in Surah Yusuf. There are many themes in this surah that you can cover, but the ones that we want to focus on mainly, especially related to the 2 verses that I'm going to be focusing on, that we're going to look into, will mainly be around faith and courage. So that's just, you understand that where we're looking at what's the context before we just jump into the 2 verses. So behind, as you can see, who can tell me what's behind this slide? So there's a map, but how does this relate to Surah Yusuf? Is anyone able to tell me? Maybe from Ustad, did you say we have Abu Bakr, Suleiman, and Haris as well, Juwairiya as well?
Yep. So they don't have to speak out. They can just put it on the chat. Right.
Yeah.
So Abu Bakr is saying maybe where he traveled, as in maybe where Yusuf alayhi salam traveled. Juwairiya is saying, is it Egypt?
Yes, yeah, it's named to Egypt. Yeah, so this was ancient Egypt. That's way before, and they used to refer to it different names to it. And where Yusuf alayhi salam was, correctly, if I'm right, Ustad, you can correct me, was in San al-Hajr. Is that correct?
Yeah, should be. Yep.
Yeah. So well done to Abu Bakr and Juwairiya. Excellent. Now, before we go into the verses, we need to know why those 2 verses or the actual surah was revealed. Just so it gives us some idea of what was going on at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and why that surah was revealed. as we know that the Quran was not revealed altogether, although we have always seen the Quran altogether, but in reality, when it was actually revealed, it was revealed in different portions, some verses, or even in one surah at a particular time was revealed. With this surah, the first 2 or 3 verses were not revealed, but the rest of the surah was revealed in one go. And there's difference of opinions according to the Mufassirun who say why it was revealed. The first one I came across was there was a group of Jewish who were visiting the Prophet ﷺ, and they wanted to prove to all of the people in Mecca that the Prophet ﷺ is basically not a prophet from Allah. So they went up to him and they asked him that, tell us about Joseph and his brothers. And because this prophet was not being mentioned a lot, and it was only mentioned in the Bible or in the community of the Jewish and Christians. So the Meccans and the Arabs were not familiar of this prophet called Joseph. So they knew that the Prophet ﷺ will not be able to answer this question. But after some time, the Prophet ﷺ was able to wait for revelation, and then the surah was revealed, and he narrated the whole surah to everyone there. And it just proved that the Prophet ﷺ is a prophet. But some people say that this may be the case of why the surah was revealed. Another opinion is that it was revealed in during the 10th or 11th year of when the first revelation began, and we're on number 0.2. And it was revealed during the saddest year when Abu Talib and Khadija radiallahu anha passed away, and also at that time the Prophet ﷺ also left Mecca to go to Taif, a place where he wanted to go and invite people to Islam. But obviously the response from there was really bad, and that year was very difficult. And when he came back, he had to take protection under the few family who were in Mecca to be able to enter in. So even the Arabs were not even letting the Prophet ﷺ enter back. So that was very difficult for the Prophet ﷺ. And some Mufassirun, some of the scholars have said that that was the time when they don't know the exact time, but it was after these events that this surah was revealed to uplift their spirits and to encourage them of the difficulty that other prophets had went through. And then followed by the third opinion by the scholars was that the companions were asking the Prophet ﷺ to narrate the best of the stories, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this surah. So now we know why might have that surah was revealed. It just gives us a little bit more context about what we're going to be expecting in the surah as well. So we're going to be focusing on Surah Yusuf, verse 36 and 37. Before we do, does anyone can tell us why Yusuf alayhi salam was sent to prison? So we know that the story itself, it's a very long story and there's so many incidents that happened. But does anyone know why Yusuf alayhi salam was sent to prison? Now that was later on. We know that the story starts off with his childhood with his father, that he was telling him of the dream he had seen, and Yaqub alayhi salam knew, his father knew that that was a sign that he's going to be a prophet later on, and he told him not to tell his brothers about it. There was some jealousy between Yusuf alayhi salam and his older brothers. They end up taking him away from his father to a field where they lied and they threw him in the well. So we know what happened all the way there. And then he was sold. So some people, a caravan was going past the well, and they found this boy. They end up selling him to a man in Egypt who took him away. And then he was raised there, he was grown. And then something happened and he ended up being in the well. So just see, so Ustad Hamid, you can elaborate on that and also see if some of the children have guessed the reason why he was sent to the prison.
Yes. Can you hear me, Ustadha?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk for a few minutes and then I'll pass it back to Ustadha Nadda as well. So, first of all, well done, Hussein, for getting the right answer. The Aziz's wife locked him up in prison. Okay, so you're almost there. It was a bit more complex and complicated than that, but yes, you're on the right track. And Zahra is saying, I think he went to prison because he resisted temptation. Very, very good. So mixing that both up, I'll give you like a very brief summary of the story. But coming back to the word you've used, Hussein, Aziz, what do you think that is? What do you think that, what status did that person have, right? And henceforth, what status did his wife have? So who was the Aziz? What is Aziz, right? So could you let me know? Maybe someone on YouTube can further elaborate before we talk about this a bit. I'm just checking YouTube, Ustada, and Musawar Shazia is saying, because a lady sent him to prison, okay. She's also said someone's wife blamed him. Okay, so yes, we are all on the right track. We're all on the right track. Just to give you a bit of context, okay, coming back to Ustada Aisha or Fizza, she's saying that everyone, oh, that's fine. She's saying someone powerful. So Zahra saying someone very powerful. What was the question? Aziz means powerful. Okay, good. The wife lied to Pharaoh. Okay, almost. We're getting our roles kind of mixed up here. Aziz is a ruler of a place. Okay, so just to give you a very small context and to emphasize what Ustadha Nadda was talking about as well, and also to talk about the life of Yusuf alayhi salam and the ups and downs that he has had. So remember, with his brothers, or all his elder brothers, okay, he also had a younger brother called Binyamin, but with his elder brothers, he had there was this kind of jealousy that was going on against Yusuf alayhi salam because he was young. His father liked him a lot because of because of him being young. His father cared for him a bit more. He wanted to make sure that Yusuf was well taken care of. So I don't think his brothers saw that as a very welcoming act from the father. So ultimately, as Ustada mentioned, they decided to get rid of him. Okay, so they came up with different plans, and ultimately, one of the brothers, who had a somewhat softer heart, he said, "Look, instead of killing him, let's take him and place him in a well. I know that there's many travelers who come from Egypt or from the other side, and they will take him away, and he will start his own life, and our problem will be solved. His problem will also be solved. He'll still live." So ultimately, that's what they decided. They threw him in. They got his shirt, right? And it's interesting that Yusuf alayhi salam's shirt comes up in his story quite a few times. Okay, it's at the time of the well, and also towards his shirt comes up towards the end of the story, where his father says, I can smell Yusuf, because they brought his shirt back from Egypt. And also in between, the story I'm going to tell you now, where when he tries to escape the minister's wife, right, she holds on to him from his shirt and rips that shirt, and again it takes center stage. So that's a very interesting way of looking at Yusuf Islam's story. You could even maybe write a book just on just through the prism of the shirt of Yusuf Islam, or his shirts. But anyway, coming back to the point, so he was in the well, and as one of the brothers expected, he was taken out. Okay, they wanted water. They saw a boy. They said, "Look, he's a good young boy. He looks strong. He's beautiful. We can sell him off as a slave." So they took him to the slave market in the urban center of Egypt, and it was right there that one of the ministers. So the Aziz is a minister. So you have. You have the queen, and then you have the prime minister and various other ministers. So he was one of the important ministers of Egypt at the time, and hence his wife was also an important figure as a result of that. Okay, very intelligent woman, very beautiful, and she was the wife of this minister. They hadn't had a child as well. So what happened was, when the minister went to the slave market, there he saw Yusuf alayhi salam, and he was taken aback by his beauty, his strength, taken aback by his mannerism, his character, and decided to buy him. And Yusuf al-Islam was shackled in chains. And the Aziz was a nice man. He was a wise man, and he was good at heart. And straight away he said, look, take all these shackles off this young boy. So they took all the shackles off Yusuf alayhi salam's hands, and slowly and shortly, everyone in the palace got used to Yusuf alayhi salam. They began to love him because of his character, his mannerism, and also his beauty. It is believed that out of all the prophets, Yusuf alayhi salam was granted one of his specialisms or his superpowers was that he was granted the most beauty, right? And he was amongst the most handsome of prophets. So, however, Aisha radiallahu anha kind of disagreed with that, but we could come back to that later on. But so back to the story. So what happened was in this palace, so imagine Yusuf al-Islam, he's coming from the well, he finds himself in luxury again, but that is going to end very soon, and it's going to end in a prison. What happens in between that gets Yusuf al-Islam out of a beautiful, luxurious mansion and into a very difficult, challenging, dark, gloomy, isolated prison? So it's a very small incident. There are very, very different narrations out there of what exactly happened. I'm just going to very briefly summarize it because we want to get back to the actual tafsir by Ustadha Nadda. So as Yusuf alayhi salam is there, slowly and shortly, the wife of the Aziz, of the minister called Zulaykha, she begins to like Yusuf alayhi salam. And slowly that likeness falls into loving Yusuf alayhi salam. So she falls in love with him. And slowly, just the thought of that turns into action. Okay. And she wants, she now wants to be with Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. And she makes her intentions known. And the Quran does explain that, that Yusuf alayhi salam, if it wasn't the fear of Allah, and if it wasn't for his faith and iman, and ultimately if it wasn't for his ma'sumiyah, which means him being infallible. Okay, I don't want to go too much into this, but prophets are infallible in the sense that Allah protects them from doing sin. So ultimately, this was the fear of Allah mixed with the protection of Allah for prophets, that when she made her intentions known, she wanted to be with Yusuf alayhi salam. He turned away and he said, no, that I fear Allah. And then that rejection wasn't enough. Okay, she then tried again and again, and ultimately she ran after Yusuf alayhi salam, right? And then Yusuf alayhi salam started running. And by the time they got to the door, Zulaykha held onto the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam and tried to pull him back, and his shirt ripped. So like I mentioned, Yusuf alayhi salam's shirt comes back into the story. And as that happened, as the shirt ripped, ended up into hands, Yusuf alayhi salam opens the big door of that room, and lo and behold, there's two people standing there, right? The Aziz, the minister himself, and a relative of Zulaykha. And ultimately, there's rage. And Zulaykha now changes her tone and says, look, Yusuf was actually running after me. I wasn't running after him. And then ultimately they decide, one of the wise people of the palace, you mentioned that, look, if Yusuf alayhi salam's shirt is ripped from the front, okay, so if his shirt is ripped from the front, then Zulaykha is telling the truth. But if Yusuf alayhi salam's shirt is ripped from the back, then Yusuf alayhi salam is telling the truth. So when they checked, Yusuf alayhi salam's shirt was ripped from the back. So ultimately, the Aziz, the minister, he forced his wife Zulaykha to apologize to Yusuf alayhi salam for what she had done, and especially that she had blamed Yusuf alayhi salam, knowing full well that it was her fault. And ultimately, they forgave Yusuf alayhi salam, forgave her, and also they overlooked all of this. However, remember, if there's a big palace that you're living in, there's lots and lots of slaves, and that news slowly reached the people on the streets and ultimately the friends of Zulaykha, and they also wanted to see Yusuf alayhi salam. And there's a story about they wanted to see him, and she invited them all to this luxurious banquet, luxurious meal, and then she placed a knife in front of all of them, and then as they were cutting the fruits, Yusuf alayhi salam walked in, and they began to cut their fingers because they were so engrossed in the beauty of Yusuf alayhi salam. And then ultimately this problem continued, okay? And they got together and decided that, look, people are going to continue talking. this problem is not going to go away because this boy is a slave. Ultimately, to save him and to save our, dignity in the palace, we need to send him away to prison. Okay, so that was all, because no matter where else you send him, people will find out, they'll know. So ultimately, they decided to send him into isolation, into prison, and that's where he ended up, right? And again, the Aziz, the minister, he was, he wasn't really happy in doing this, but ultimately, the way he saw it, the bigger picture was, it's better for them and their dignity, right? And it's also better for Yusuf alayhi salam and also his dignity, because he was a wise man. So ultimately, they decided to put him in prison, and lo and behold, after some time, they actually forgot that Yusuf alayhi salam was in prison. And you can read the story later on in your own times of how Yusuf alayhi salam sends out a message from his isolation. But that's the story of how Yusuf alayhi salam ends up in prison. Not his fault. He has been blamed, etc. And then he finds himself in prison. But he takes it, okay? He takes it on board, and he's now accepted this isolation, and he spends his time in prison. Back over to you, Ustadha Nadda.
Jazakallah khair, Ustad. That was very helpful. And I'm sure that the students will be able to understand these two verses so much more better if we had just gone into it straight away. So it's really important that you understand what's going on before the verses or after the verses, whatever verses that you're looking, just to get a full understanding of what's going on. And you take away the correct reflections from it. So Jazakallah khairan, Ustad. So we're going to be focusing on verse 36. Now, before I explain both of these verses and what's happening in these verses, how does this verses tell us what's going to happen next? I want everyone who's watching, and especially the younger students, I just want you to try and think what kind of reflections and lessons you can take away. So before I tell you how I always end my session with telling you the lessons that we have learned from these two verses, or the general lessons that we've learned, I want you to try and think of some of the lessons that you've learned from these two verses, and then we're going to be looking at what I thought were the lessons as well. So we're going to go over that as well. But just so that you are paying attention as well, I want you to start thinking that as well. So verse 36, so it begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ السِّجْنَ فَتَيَانِ. So let me just get my laser so you can follow. So here there were two other men who entered in prison with Yusuf alayhi salam, and one of them says, قال أحدهما إني أراني أعصر خمرا. So straight away the story has changed. So before that we know that that Yusuf alayhi salam was not in prison, and straight away the verses have changed now, and it's telling us that when Yusuf alayhi salam was entered into prison, there were two other people who were entered with him, so he wasn't by himself. And then one of them straight away says, so this is not, so just to understand that this, whatever's happening in this verse hasn't happened straight away. So they've entered, and then there was some time which was spent, and then later on one of them have says, and we'll understand why, how do we know all of this, that there was a time gap in between. And one of them says that I saw myself in a dream pressing wine, and then the other one says that I saw myself carrying bread on top of my head, and the birds were eating from it. And then both of them says, نَبِّئْنَا بِتَأْوِيلِهِ. So they're telling Yusuf alayhi salam to tell us, what does that mean? And then they say that we know that you are from those who are good, people who do good deeds, people who are of the good character. So both of them is basically telling about their dreams, and because of the last statement, which is Inna naraka minal muhsinin, it just shows that obviously if you are with someone, straight away you don't know of the character. So the fact that they entered the two other men who didn't know Yusuf alayhi salam at all, they were actually from the from the palace, so they knew the king. They used to work for the king, and they, because of the crimes they committed, they were ended up in the prison as well. So they didn't know Yusuf alayhi salam. And the fact that in the end of the verse it says that because of your character, because of how you are, and the way we've seen you over time, and obviously to know someone, you need, there's a lot of time which is spent in order to tell and say that, you're a good person. So you can tell that after a while, these two person have spent time with Yusuf alayhi salam. They know they can trust him, and they say that we've seen a dream. Telling someone about your dream is quite personal as well. So the fact that you know that this person is good and you can trust the advice also shows the kind of character Yusuf alayhi salam did have. And both of them tell us, they tell Yusuf alayhi salam. And Ustad Hamid, what was really interesting over here as well, that they got to know Yusuf alayhi salam so much that they knew the kind of things he was good in. So you can tell that Yusuf alayhi salam, even though what happened to him from childhood all the way from how his brother treated him, his own people treated him, and he ended up being with the minister. They looked after him as well, and then again he was hurt by them as well, and the way his wife treated him, the accusation he was put under, and then he was taken away. So you can understand the difficult times he's gone through and being hurt by his people that he spent with. Yet when he is in the prison, um, he doesn't let go of the good things he has, because usually when we go through a difficult time, generally we become very negative and we forget the good abilities we have, the skills we have. So you can see here that Yusuf alayhi salam carried that skill of being able to understand and interpret the dreams. And if we remember at the beginning of the surah, that Yaqub alayhi salam used to do the same. When Yusuf alayhi salam went to Yaqub alayhi salam and he said that I had a dream, Yaqub alayhi salam was interpreting the dream as well, and he knew that what that dream meant. So you can see that this kind of a skill was carried on, it was passed on to Yusuf alayhi salam as well, where he had that skill. At the same time, what's more important is the way you carry yourself as well. And I think in this verse, it really highlights that sometimes by just how you are with other people, it has a big influence and impact on other people. And I'm sure Ustad Hamid would agree to this. Ustad Hamid, do you have anything else you want to add to this verse?
No. I think that's there's so much we can understand from this, and just to remind ourselves as well that when the Quran tells us a story, it's very unlike and very different to the
Yeah,
telling of a story which you may find in the Tanakh, which is the Jewish sacred scriptures, or in the Gospels, or the New Testament, and also in various other books. It doesn't give too much detail, but it highlights the most important parts of the story.
yeah,
So what the Quran doesn't also do, it doesn't tell us exactly how long Yusuf al-Islam has spent his time in prison,
yeah,
how long he's known these people for.
yeah,
Again, we can go into hadith or tafsir for that. And also we can go back into some of the Judeo-Christian or the Judaic stories as well. But
yeah,
at the same, the most important thing is to remember that stories that are told to us in the Quran, it gets to the crux of the matter straight away. Okay, there's no
yeah,
messing around, and
yeah,
it highlights the important parts of the story. So don't think of it as he's been thrown into prison and straight away he finds these two men there, and then
yeah,
straight away they ask him, to interpret their dreams. But
yeah,
there would have been some passage, because remember, the minister does kind of forget that Yusuf alayhi salam has been in prison until he reminds one of these prisoners who are with him when he is set free, which Ustadha Nadda will possibly, I think, go through now.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And then carried on with the next verse, 37. This is now Yusuf alayhi salam speaking, and he's saying that I no food will be provided for you. On another way, that before your food comes to you, there's no doubt that I'll be able to tell you the according to Abdul Halim, he says the description of the actual food that comes before you, or some other scholars say that I'll be able to tell you the interpretation of your dream before the food comes. So just so, because maybe there's a short time of when the food arrives, and he's so expert in the way he interprets the dream that he's able to do it very quickly and very accurately as well, and he's sure about it as well. um, and then it carries on that all of this knowledge has been given to me from my Lord, and I have abandoned the way of those who do not believe in Allah and who are deniers of the hereafter. Now, this last line is very important because it just highlights um, the reason that Yusuf alayhi Islam, despite of what he's gone through, has not forgotten his mission of him, still inviting people to Islam and telling him to believe in Allah. So, regardless of where you are and whatever you're doing, it's so important that you still remember um, the reason why you are in that, circumstance in the first place. So, regardless of whatever has happened to Yusuf alayhi salam, he still knows that even if it's just those two people, I still need to invite them to Islam and tell them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And through this, he eventually gets out, because when the other two men are released, they tell the king about the skills that Yusuf alayhi salam has, and he eventually leaves. But I think what's more important here is that regardless of what happens to you, we still need to hold on to the foundation um, and remember and understand and realize um, why Allah puts us in different situations. And I think the way that Allah has just in these two verses explained in such a beautiful way what, the important parts of what happened in the prison. He came across two people, the ability and his ability of interpreting dreams came in place, and through his character he was able to take that trust, build that trust with the two men, and eventually he was able to give him that one in just two verses. You can imagine the miracle in the words and the way Allah has explained in just two verses, this brief summary. And at the same time, if you just go into it as well and you read upon it, this page is written on these two verses explaining the time, and so many lessons that we can take away from there. I think we have one student who raised their hand, Ustad. Um, does anyone have?
Yeah, so student who raised their hand, if you can maybe put down on the chat what you would like to do.
Yeah.
Um,
So before we move on, so just start writing down, if you can, some of the lessons you've taken away from these two verses. Now we're just going to focus on some of the words. So this week, I decided to pick up the easy words instead of going into the harder words, because these words come up in the Quran a lot as well. So I thought it would be a good idea to add to your vocabulary book. So I've managed to add the diacritics as well, so hopefully that will help you to pronounce the letters properly as well. So make a note of this as well. These words come up in the Quran a lot, so hopefully if you have a record of all of these words, they'll help you as well. And every time they come, you'll be able to relate and connect in some way. So the first word is dakhala, and it has several meanings according to whatever the verse is, or whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to say. So I'll put down to enter, go, walk, come. There's several other meanings as well, but these are the main meanings. Qala is also used a lot, and I know some of you have attended few Arabic classes, so I'm sure you've come across this word before. So qala is when someone speaks or someone says something, and this is also a verb as well. So someone has said or is saying. So depending on the context of the verse as well, it varies in the translation. Inna, it comes again a lot, so it means indeed, verily, truly. Fawqa, it's top, up, above, beyond, has other meanings as well. Qabla, before, previously, early on. So all of these words that I've picked are from the two verses that we were just studying. At-tayr is bird. Qawm has come a lot in the Quran as well. So people, nation, tribe, group of people, crowd. Al-akhirah is all hereafter. So you'll come across this word as well, and kafirun as well, which is unbelievers. So please do make a note of these, and if you want to make a note of the other words as well, then that's brilliant as well. Ustad Hamid, can you see any of the students written any lessons they've taken from the
Right. So let's move on to some of the. There
before
was
I
some.
share my ones?
Sure. There are a few messages that have come through. I think I'll go through them now. There was something that Zahra mentioned. She
Yeah,
said, also, Allah has never sent a virus or pandemic without the cure to it. So we should all be hopeful. Yes, inshallah.
definitely. Yeah.
Um, and then Fiza has mentioned that we should always keep our trust in Allah, no matter how bad the situation
Well
is.
done, Fiza. Yes,
Yep, so that's on Zoom. YouTube, there wasn't anything there since I last checked, but let's
that's
give everyone about a minute to
that's fine.
maybe jot down any points or on the chat in regards to the lessons that you've learned from today. And remember, when we look at tafsir, we should either be taking away one of two things. So one is either something that we can, something pragmatic and practical we can take away to practice and act upon.
Yeah,
That's number one. Number two, if there's nothing that we can actually practice, then number two, is there something that's changed the way we think? Is there something
yeah,
from the tafsir or the lesson that we've learned that should change the way we think? And ultimately, that should have an impact on how we live. So either one of those things, something you can either act upon or something that's changed your worldview. So do type and let us know. It'll be interesting to hear what you have taken away from the tafsir.
that's right. Yep. Um, so I'm just going to move on to the lessons, and then we'll end it with your reflections and what you've learned with the verses. But what Fiza and Zahra said were very correct as well. So well done. Um, so there were so many lessons as well, but I think the things that I want you guys to remember, because if I give too much information, you might not be able to remember everything. So I think the few lessons that I thought which was really important was hope, and I think Fiza and Zahra, both of them mentioned that. So well done for picking that out. And it's sometimes it's not straight away that you can pick that up. So the fact that you've understood it properly, even from the story and everything, when you put everything in place, then these kind of reflections come in mind as well. So I think the first one that is very important is hope, having faith in Allah. And I think if we look back at the previous sessions that we've covered as well, in all of the prophets, when they were put in a very difficult circumstance, we know that there was a moment where it was very easy to lose hope. So the fact that when Yusuf alayhi salam was, thrown in the well as well, if we talk about that, it says in the verse that he was thrown at the deepest of the level of the well, where it was absolutely black. There was no escape. And yet Yusuf alayhi salam had that faith. Yunus alayhi salam, when he was in the stomach of the whale, completely away from the whole world, he's in a creature, he's in the stomach of the whale. Yet they don't lose that hope. And I think sometimes that's the actual test, when you're put in a very difficult uh, uh, kind of a hardship, and it's very easy to lose hope, and you decide to hold on to your faith. And even though it might not make sense, you might not understand what's going to happen, how you're going to come out of that situation, but because of the iman and the faith you have, that somehow Allah will take you out. And I think that moment of that few seconds that you have is the bit when it really tests your faith in Allah. And I think that part is very important, to be able to have that hope, and hold on to that. And I think if we can take away just with this lesson, I think that will be sufficient from this surah. And we see that throughout the whole story of Surah Yusuf alayhi salam as well. Carried on with, I wanted to speak about courage. So regardless of what happened to Yusuf alayhi salam, the kind of things people were saying, outside of the palace as well, people were blaming Yusuf alayhi salam as well. Um, it didn't take away him carrying on with what was his mission. So he still had that courage, regardless of what, however bad the situation is. I am still going to hold on to the best parts of my character, and I'm going to carry on. So you having that courage of facing people regardless of what their opinions are, and I think it's very, very relevant to us in our time, when everyone has an opinion and everyone wants to say something to you, but you still need to hold on to your values, your principles, and you need to have faith in yourself. And with courage, you carry on uh, with your mission and whatever purpose you have, a way of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eventually. And lastly, um, content. So why I said that was, we all of us are different. We all have individual personalities, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a special talent. You might not be able to see it right now, but with time, you're able to see that everyone has a quality that they are able to benefit other people with. So, for example, with Yusuf alayhi salam, he had that quality of the ability to interpret dreams, and he used that in order to serve his purpose. So all of us have been given a quality where we are able to use that in order to serve our purpose, in order to help the community, the people around us, our family members. So we should try and search for that as well. Invest time in yourself, um, especially in the time that we are in, when we have lots of time, especially the younger students. Invest that time in, try to find out what good things you are, you that you are good at. So even if you make mistakes, it's fine. That only tells you how closer you are in order to figuring out what you are good at. So to be able to know what your talents are, what your skills are, your abilities. Use this time to see, especially ask your family members. They will tell you as well the way what you are good at. And it might not relate to your studies directly. It might be something that you're doing on the side. But work on that, because you never know, that particular skill will eventually help you in order to achieve your purpose and mission. So that was it from me. Anything else that you want to add, or any comments?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yes, Ustad, we can hear you.
Yes. So I'll just add a few reflections I've just had whilst you were teaching.
Yeah.
And it's just the fact that, so, when we read these verses from the Quran,
Yeah.
it's not just the mere reading of these verses and kind of moving on. I think to
Mhm.
really benefit from them, we almost need to put ourselves in the shoes of Yusuf al-Islam and try and understand
Yeah.
his worldview, right? So can you imagine that Yusuf alayhi salam, he finds himself in a very, very dark place. He's isolated from everything, right? And he doesn't have anyone there to help him. He's in the well, okay? And every little, and can you imagine the types of creepy crawlies and the animals that are down there? And then any kind of sound echoes even more. So that, that increases one's anxiety and fear inside that space. Who would imagine, right, that it's from that well? So it's only later that we read the story that we know that there's going to be him going into a palace. But at that very moment when Yusuf alayhi salam is in the well, he could not have imagined that he would even come out of a well, let alone find himself in a palace. So similarly, us, all of us, even our students, myself, we sometimes find ourselves in situations which we can call, like the situation of the well of Yusuf alayhi salam, where everything is dark, okay,
Yeah.
and there's no one there to help us.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's that very moment we need to realize actually Allah has a greater plan. You just need to keep hope, right?
Mhm.
Just need to keep hope and keep going, not to give up. And we need to break down this story to understand the story in the moment that Yusuf alayhi salam goes through his life. So when he's in the well, he doesn't know what's going to happen next. Everything for him at that moment is finished. Everything for him at that moment is in complete isolation without any help at all. And we're unsure about exactly how many days he stays in the well as well. And then finally he finds himself in a palace. But remember, that's not going to be forever. So luxury. So when we do find ourselves in times which are nice and easy, to
Yeah.
not get too used to them.
Yeah.
Okay, not to get too used to them, because life is not about on non-stop luxury and non-stop things going easy. Life is all about hardships, overcoming them, and then the next hardship, overcoming that. So that's where Ramadan, because it's coming, hopefully, it might be tomorrow, day after, whatever.
Yeah.
For us, Ramadan should be that practice, right? That moment to reflect, and that moment to say, look, if we can go through this difficulty here on a short scale, we can definitely increase that to make it go large scale. So that's something that I think with use. And then after that, he's in his luxury moment, and it's a well, in comparison to the Pharaoh's palace, it's still not as great. But then that's taken away from him as well. And then Yusuf alayhi salam ends up in a prison. Again, he's isolated, maybe not as isolated as the well, but nevertheless, he's still isolated from the real world. And that goes to show that when we have problems, some problems may be greater, some may be smaller. But nevertheless, we need to go through and overcome them one by one and be reflective and focus on Allah as we go through them. Because remember, for a believer, every situation is good. If a person is in a good situation, like Yusuf alayhi salam when he was with his father, or when Yusuf alayhi salam was in the palace, he always thanked Allah for that. He always did shukr. He thanked Allah. He was graceful. And then when he found himself in the well, he didn't say, "Look, I don't believe in anything because this has happened, that has happened, and I, forget everything." Or he didn't, when he was in prison, he did at that moment. And the verses that Ustadha Nadda brought up are very, very important to understand. That even there, he kept his objective at the forefront, which was to connect the creation to the Creator, to
Yeah.
connect us and everyone else who was there to Allah directly. That was his objective. And thereafter, if you read on to the story, he's then taken out, and then he's given a position of high esteem. He became even greater than the Aziz that was with him, that he was with initially. And then he finds himself again in a palace. So there's always ups and downs. And that's what, that box that we drew for our reflection, that if we miss one difficulty, we'll always find ourselves in another. So when we're reading stories like this, right, I really, really, really urge our students, when we do read stories from the Quran, not to just read them as if, as if we're reading a storybook.
Yeah.
There's much more reflection. So you read one verse, stop, read the meaning, put yourself in that position. Okay, I don't know the rest of the story. What is this prophet going through? I mean, Yunus alayhi salam, imagine if you were stuck in the belly of a whale, right? Okay, let's give you another example. Imagine if you somehow you went to a museum, okay, just before the lockdown, right? And you went to the toilet, and you took long, and by the time you come out, there's no one else there, okay? And what's happened is you've locked yourself in the toilet. You don't have a phone. You have absolutely nothing. That is, you're still at least able to breathe. You still know where you are, but you're in lockdown for days and days. You don't know when that's going to end. Similar, Yunus alayhi salam was in total lockdown. He didn't know how long he was going to be there for. So what I'm saying is, when we're reading a story, to pause, think, okay, Yunus alayhi salam or Yusuf alayhi salam doesn't know what's going to happen. Only Allah knows, right? So they don't know in that moment what's going to happen next, right?
Yeah.
And even with Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? He's Battle of Badr about to take place, right? And he's mustered a force of 313 Sahaba. They only had like 7 swords, okay? And this is historically, this is accurate as well, because Arabia didn't have steel to make too many swords, right? And they had a few horses or camels, and that's about it. On the other side, there was a force of 1,000 men who had all the swords they needed. They had so many horses. They had everything. This was going to be a bloodbath, right? And there's Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before, not knowing what's going to happen, and that's where he made dua to Allah. Oh Allah, if we lose this battle, that's the end. That's the end of it, because here is the cream of the crop, the 313, right? And that's it. If they are obliterated, that's the end of the faith. And he's making this dua to Allah, not knowing what's going to come. But then he has hope in Allah, faith in Allah. So I think that's why it's important to pause during these stories and think and reflect. Because even when we read the story of the Battle of Badr, we read it, right, from hindsight. And I think that's sometimes a problem. We read it from hindsight, knowing how it ends.
Mm.
And that's what doesn't give us the true flavor or experience or feeling of that verse, or of that story. So we've got to take it step by step, live in the moment of that story to understand how it would have been, to really get a grasp of that story. So that's my very quick advice for myself and our young students. And Ustada, if you like, shall I just very quickly go over some of the last few comments that were coming over?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay? Yes, okay. So Fizz saying also, if we do have homework, can we share it the next week? Yes, we can do that. We can do that. So what we will do is we'll try and do it outside of the tafsir time. So we may do like maybe 10, 15 minutes before. So Ustadha Nadda still gets her tafsir time. That's we can do that. Oh yeah, if so, can we upload it to the FET website?
Mm.
I'm so excited for fasting in Ramadan. Yes. So if there's anything that you would like to share with your teachers, by all means, as I've mentioned, I made a video which will be sent out to parents on where to upload things,
Yeah.
onto our website and in the right places. So we've given you places on the website to upload your homework. Fizza is Zahra mentioned it will probably be easier since most of us don't have to like go to school or for adults to go to work. Yep, inshallah. And Haris is saying that too. Okay, so if there is any kind of homework, like I mentioned, go on our website. The weekday session, I've clearly labeled it on the button. Make sure you're reading clearly enough, and then you will see where to upload your homework. Make sure you do that, inshallah. Okay. Anything else, Ustadha, you want to add, or should we?
Um,
And yeah.
yeah, just quickly one thing from what you were saying about that we shouldn't be reading these passages of the Quran and the stories as though they're just any other story. And I think one aspect that we always forget, we should try and remind ourselves that this is Allah speaking to you directly. And I think that really helps me sometimes when I'm trying to find the reflections and lessons from there, that this is Allah speaking to me. How can me myself um, take lessons from this? And I think if you just focus on that aspect straight away, it will give you that full depth and understanding, and you'll be able to relate to it more. So I think having that set of a set of mindset as well helps you to understand the verses more clearly. So yeah, but jazakallah khairan to everyone.
Jazakallah.
Don't have any homeworks, so wherever you want to share from your notes, your reflections, then please do. But yeah, jazakallah khairan,
Yeah.
Ustad.
And just to add for Zahra and Fizza, if you do want to share your notes, please put them up on the uploaded section. And next week, I think at the start, we can very quickly go through it at the beginning
Yeah,
of the lesson as well.
yeah,
And I will, inshallah, just finish on last point and wrap up. A question from Habib. I'll just quickly answer it because we have gone over time and
no
we'll
problem.
move on. Habib has mentioned, so this is Habib. Is it better to face hardships and be patient than dis? Okay, he's saying it is better to face hardships and be patient than disobeying Allah. So absolutely, I definitely agree with that. But Habib, there's another way of looking at it, right? There was one elder who once said, "Innama al-ataya ala matan al-balaya," that that good things, right? That good things, they are almost brought to us on like a train or a vehicle of hardships and difficulty. So basically, what that means is sometimes these hardships come to us, try and reflect and think of them as actually gifts from Allah to overcome these difficulties in order to enter His, everlasting peaceful abode in Jannah, inshallah. Jazakallahu khairun. Jazakallah Ustadha Nada for your time. I know how difficult it could be planning and preparing, especially online when you cannot see the people in front of you. It's very difficult to sit in front of a laptop and try and be as normal as possible. It is a tough job, and jazakallah for that, Ustad. May Allah reward you in this world and also in the hereafter. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.